Okay. Again, thanks folks for attending this call this morning or afternoon. I just quickly to introduce myself. My name is Travis Nadelhofer. I'm a founder here at NorthGravity, and just kind of quickly introduce NorthGravity is a software company founded in 2018, kind of really focused on technology and commodities, delivering solutions with a pretty high focus on AI that we're going to get to in a few minutes here. Again, just some logistics for the call. All the attendees, your audio and camera is turned off. You should have access through Teams here to ask questions. We would encourage you guys, please, to ask questions throughout the call. We will record these questions and answer them at the end of the presentation. So again, please feel free to do that. That's kind of the logistics of the call. Now, again, quickly to introduce kind of our presenter. Ani is going to be presenting throughout this webinar here. Again, Ani has been at NorthGravity for the past 3 years and has worked quite closely with a lot of our clients to implement many of the kind of AI and LLM solutions that he's going to be discussing. This is kind of scanned across different types of customers, such as large oil companies to kind of brokers, all the way down to exchanges. With that, I'm going to pass it over to have Ani discuss the topics in this webinar. And again, as a reminder, please enter your questions throughout the chat throughout this presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Travis, and thank you to everyone who is able to join us today. So as said earlier, my name is Ani Sundaram, and I've been working with NorthGravity for the last 3 years. And today we'll be discussing sort of use cases and our experience in working with AI and making it useful for individuals in the commodity and energy space. So we're going to kind of walk through, define what is considered success in this sort of a realm, go ahead and also review some use cases with clients we've worked with and successes we've had, and then also wrap things up with kind of discussing common pain points and potential remediation for these pain points. So before anything, it seems important to set the stage with clear definitions of the key terms. Obviously, a lot of buzzwords are kind of thrown out in the space, so it's important to kind of define these things before kind of discussing how they were implemented or applied by us. So really the first term is sort of what is a large language model. So large language model is any sort of AI model trained on massive text data sets, which can understand and generate human language, both understanding responses and then generating in the same human language. So this is kind of what you see within general chat, if you're asking a question to ChatGPT, or if you're kind of interacting with, a general personal AI. Second term that we wanted to discuss is agentic AI. So agentic AI refers to AI systems which autonomously plan, execute multi-step tasks, and make decisions. So instead of just a prompt and then a response, agents can chain actions together to finish and complete deliverables. The last comment is sort of the concept of generative AI. So generative AI the main point is this is an AI that creates new content, whether it be text, whether it be images, whether it be structured data. And again, this is kind of based on patterns learned from training data. So this could end up being creating a HTML report, enriching a data set, and creating outputs ready for an analyst. So with the table set with respect to definitions, we wanted to kind of go into what NorthGravity believes is useful AI. So in our world, useful AI ends up being measurable workflow automation plus controlled risk. So this really can be bucketed out into 3 real concepts, which each sort of solution we implement needs to have. So the first concept is measurable impact. What are you exactly saving or increasing efficiency for? Are you allowing for a faster go-to-market? Are you reducing manual effort for a respective process? Are you able to quantify what sort of time savings this process has, which you are automating? So being able to understand which workflow you're actually targeting and what is the value of automating or targeting that workflow. The next concept is stage deployment. So AI is not infallible, as I'm sure many people here know, and it's important to be very strategic and very staged with how you deploy such solutions. Whether this be human review gates for any potential edge cases, whether this be QA checks to ensure that data meets a certain schema or that there are not many big anomalies. It's important to sort of combine a validation process and combine sort of staging process with the deployment of such solutions. The last point, which I'm sure technology teams are all very concerned on, is sort of the fact that it has to be secure and affordable. So ensuring that your prompts and your respective processes are token optimized, use the right models, and that your data kind of stays in your cloud or stays where you want without unauthorized exfiltration. So with this in mind, we have kind of gone through a framework of how we deliver such solutions to meet what we classify as useful AI. So really it comes down to 6 key steps. So obviously one is identifying the workflows that we want to automate or streamline using some of these technologies. 2 is sort of going ahead and ensuring the data and the sources you are working with are ready and structured for such automation. 3 and 4 are sort of prototyping, evaluating, and then sort of deploying. And then 6 is sort of continuous monitoring. So having those QA checks and having that schema validation that we were discussing earlier. The main point here is while everyone often talks about differences between models or difference between sort of outputs from given models, the secret sauce is not necessarily in the model. It's in the plumbing and controls underlying your respective automation, which we'll talk about in some of the use cases coming up. So to kick things off, the first use case we wanted to discuss was with one of our clients who was a large oil and gas brokerage. The main issue here at play is this brokerage had a ton of brokers with a ton of historical data, and they wanted to commercialize and sell this broker mark data across product lines. Here is the issue. The issue was these are not necessarily broker marks which are saved in structured formats. Some of these were had years of historical data which were trapped in email reports and random inboxes. Some of these also had inconsistent HTML formats with a bunch of different edge cases, and manually kind of getting this to live would have taken months of very error-prone and human-involved scraping. So with this in mind, we actually built a solution to help this client get to market as soon as possible. So our general solution was a set of LLM agents, which go ahead and parse years of unstructured historical files and train on, hey, this respective report format from this respective year might have a sort of tweak in its format or an edge case. So kind of training on that and learning from that. Additionally, these outputs using the NorthGravity platform were saved in time series databases, which then we could create the derived data sets, entitle, et cetera, et cetera. So all in all, this really helped go-to-market go from months to just a couple of weeks. And obviously, this allowed the brokerage team to focus on some of the things that matter more, like how to package their data, how to better commercialize it. So just to kind of show you a visual of what we're doing, as you can see, the image on the left is how these files were structured. So pretty much a lack of said structure. So having just HTML-based tables and graphs, which we then went ahead, parsed into end-of-day or intraday groups, and put into a time series database, allowing for client queryability. And then lastly, this data ends up going through a consistently present QA and validation check, which goes in and says, hey, is this data in the right format? Is it meeting a certain range so that there's not, anomalous outliers? And are we handling business cases, edge cases correctly? So all in all, we were able to take this client from scattered and unstructured email reports to actually clean and queryable time series data. And a lot of this plumbing is powered by the fact that with our agentic solution, we're able to kind of get a lot of things done quickly here, which again, on a manual end would have been tedious and error prone. So again, in terms of impact, really this helped them have data available quickly and seamlessly and allowed them to kind of commercialize things quickly. So huge amount of increase in data availability with millions of symbols onboarded and billions of daily data updates. So for people who are data providers, AI can definitely be a bridge in allowing you to go from an unstructured current process and current schema to having a monetizable data product. So with this in mind, let's go into another case study. So this case study is regarding an engagement we have with a major US oil company. And this is not necessarily commercialization of data, but multi-source data normalization. So basically the challenge here is this client wanted to go ahead and create a kind of holistic normalized refinery outage database. And this refinery outage database had to include multiple different sources. So Genscape data, Kepler data, JLC data, and kind of put it in a outside container, which is a single source of truth. Just to walk you through how problematic this could be, let's go through some examples below. So for this given refinery, Genscape calls it a refinery Sinopec Genhai. Kepler calls that same refinery ZRCC Genhai Refining, whereas JLC calls the same refinery in Mandarin Genhai Lianhua. So we're in a situation here where there are differences in mapping and normalization across language, obviously across units as well. So really being able to compare these things apples to apples and being able to kind of have everything in a normalized structure was really the key for these guys to make important insights off of this data. So with this in mind, we created a solution which basically combined fuzzy matching and agentic mapping to basically have a multi-layer entity resolution, which kind of takes these algorithms and allows us to kind of map things all into one place. This included normalization pipelines. This included unit conversions kind of based across different customary systems. And obviously, as with our prior projects, there was sort of a staging of human review of edge cases and sort of ambiguous matches. The great thing with this is this agent we ended up having also continuously learned. So some of the accuracy in dealing with some of these translations and dealing with some of these unit conversions really did improve over time. The key insight here is that this data, while it's very valuable to have JLC data, have Kepler data, have Genscape data, all in separate places, this data is worth nothing without apples to apples comparability, which having this sort of a solution makes it a lot less tedious. So with that in mind, let's go through another refinery outage data use case with a client we had, but which was a little bit more different and focused on enrichment. So this use case is with an independent refiner. And basically, this refiner actually had solved the refinery outage problem. So we're in a situation where they had this normalized data set. However, the issue was this data set lacked real world context. Traders wanted abilities to kind of put context and put news behind each of these respective data points to understand what was planned, what was unplanned, and what are the macroeconomic events driving set outages. Given this, we went ahead and created a process which this time was externally facing. So we create a process which actually checks the news daily based on select keywords and topics which we iterate through, takes pieces of news that it's able to scrape and normalize the credibility of these sources. So obviously, a source from Reuters might have a higher weighting than a source from X. And we were able to link these news points with relevant data points. What's cool is we were able to also do cross-checking. So being in a situation where we're able to maybe check on social media, hey, a minute ago, there was this big hurricane in this respective event. How do other news providers kind of triangulate onto the same point? So again, just to kind of show you the example of the flow, let's just say that from that normalized refinery outage data set, the client sees and says, hey, refinery X has gone offline. Our agent would go in, scope and scan sources like Google, like Reuters, like X, again, does a credibility scoring, and then allows you to do kind of enrichment of this data set, allowing for alerts, allowing for additional context and notes for data points, and even driving well towards visualizations. I think at this point, with how advanced some of these models have gotten, web connectivity is sort of table stakes. However, what really makes a secret sauce is weighting that web connectivity with credibility and linking it to insights that are already seen within underlying data that is structured. So that is really what makes a lot of these signals tradable in an intelligent fashion. So we've gone through a couple examples sort of in the oil and gas space and in the refinery space. This is a very interesting example we have sort of in the compliance space. So one of our clients is one of the leading renewables exchanges. And with these guys, they had an issue of sort of being able to automate the validation of engineering diagrams. So basically, this client has carbon projects, carbon credits, has a lot of different market participants, and there needs to be some validation of, hey, this carbon project has this amount of emissions, uses this amount of power, et cetera, et cetera. So before we kind of ended up interacting with this client, all of these diagrams, along with their relevant compliance reports, were actually matched by a manual sales operation team. Obviously, when you're dealing with non-searchable text on some of these reports, when you're dealing with visual engineering diagrams, this process is slow, costly, and error-prone. And when you're dealing with something like this, which is kind of regulation-based to obviously maintain the health of an exchange, there are regulatory consequences to errors. With this in mind, we built this client an AI-assisted analysis bot. So within this bot, users can directly interact with the bot to where they, one, send those engineering diagrams and compliance documents to the bot. The bot can go in, combining usage of LLM technologies with optical character recognition or OCR technologies to see and say, hey, these documents match up. Or maybe there's an issue with a location mentioned in the document compared to the location mentioned in the diagram. So it has the ability to flag disparities and provide detailed audit reports off of which users and market participants can actually edit and kind of improve on those compliance documents. We've gone through 4 different case studies here, and while they all have varying inputs, they all have sort of varying goals, they kind of end up following that same framework that we ended up discussing earlier. So in each case, there is an input type off of which the normalization or enrichment of said input, there's measurable impact in being able to automate it. In each case, we kind of use a select pattern within these modern technologies, set up guardrails and set up staging, and each of them had a measurable outcome, which we can see helped improve efficiency or improve the ability to go to market. So we've been pretty rosy with respect to our case studies so far. However, obviously, people always think of potential pitfalls and potential drawbacks to using LLMs. So we wanted to talk about some of the things which break in the real world. So there's really 3 topics. I will discuss each of them in depth, but just to preview them, the first topic is obviously that LLMs are not always accurate. There's always accuracy and hallucination risk, and often one of the fears that people have is sort of confident hallucination, if that makes sense. So we can kind of walk through some of these solutions later, but another sort of item that people often talk about is efficiency. Are you using too powerful of an LLM for a smaller project? Is there a cost at scale which a business line may need to consider? So again, the sort of whole battle of, hey, is using this respective model something which will help me reduce costs over having manual costs? And the last point to any information security technology team is sort of security and governance. So ensuring that data exfiltration risks are remediated accordingly and ensuring that models don't necessarily exfiltrate any training data or any data you use to the outside. Because obviously in this space in commodities energy, there's a lot of regulatory exposure. So it's always important to have everything buttoned up on that end. Let's walk through some potential remediations for each of these respective pitfalls. On the side of hallucinations and accuracy, we believe in the 3-word concept of trust but verify. So really, in terms of potential ways you can kind of remediate this, the first item is making sure that responses are kind of grounded on retrieved evidence. Every AI output should be kind of linked to source data or linked to sort of certain processes and not necessarily put in a situation where you're just asking a question and making a prompt and then kind of free-forming things. Secondly, as we discussed in some of our prior case studies, it's important to have proper structured outputs and proper QA checks and validations as you stage deployment of such solutions. Within NorthGravity platform specifically, there are automated QA checks mechanisms, so checking for outliers, checking for file size, checking for file schema. It's important to kind of have automated mechanisms on this end so that you can kind of figure out and iterate to see whether there might be improvement needed in your AI solution. The second item is, again, back to that structured item side of things. It's important to kind of keep structure and keep standardization with whatever output set of data you end up having. So, putting yourself in a situation where you catch anomalies before they even reach production is quite valuable. The last point is sort of the concept of human review gates for, I guess, high stake steps. So again, sort of stage verification. If you're in a situation where something is low volume, but very high stakes, perhaps you might have a human review more of those final outputs. Maybe in another situation, you have automated rules set up to where if a number is kind of X% higher than sort of an average, maybe you should have a verification for that as well. So when you're dealing with compliance sensitive workflows, there is sort of a place to having sort of a reviewer in these sort of processes. Moving forward, the point of token optimization. So there's really two different buckets of, I guess, solutions on this end. The first bucket is sort of general best practices. So one best practice that we know that I've used personally is sort of being able to smart chunk and cache context. So chunking documents optimally and trying to optimize to the minimal amount of tokens that are used for a respective response. The second point is sort of model routing. Not every single problem needs necessarily Opus 4.6 or some of the highest, level models. So like being very strategic with respect to how you route to small and faster models for maybe more frequent, but less complex tasks, and then kind of reserving large models for some of the things which might need more complex reasoning. The last point we wanted to bring up was sort of general policies and procedures within your own internal organization. I know in our end, in NorthGravity, there's a lot of different templates and playbooks we have for specific sort of prompts. Maybe there is a data transformation prompt. Maybe there's a PowerPoint creation prompt. So having these sort of standards and best practices really put you in a situation where you kind of understand sort of how things should be structured from the get-go, allowing for fewer tokens, but at the same time, better output. And the last point comes to sort of agentic solutions. Be very tactical with respect to how you use multi-step agents. I mean, as for instance, a sort of basic ETL or simple extraction task doesn't necessarily need the overhead of having an agentic solution kind of go through multiple steps of a respective process. So being tactical, having those procedures is key. Last point we wanted to bring up was sort of security. So I'm not going to necessarily go into every single one of these, but a lot of these end up being followed by general policies and procedures. So having strong role-based access control, having policies to ensure that production data is not necessarily sent directly to an LLM endpoint. But a few of these are also kind of addressed by the fact that by opt-outs and by I guess, internal or internal-facing LLMs. So for certain clients that we have, for instance, we use AWS Bedrock integration, which allows you to localize the usage of an LLM to your cloud and kind of prevents data exfiltration. Another element is sort of opt-out. So all the major models that we've personally end up using, at minimum, have an ability to opt out of having your data used as training data, but at maximum, even have that done by default. So again, these two components plus general technical procedures and policies are very important to ensure the security of whatever you're building. Just a last sort of point to put a bow on this. We are pro-automation, but we're not necessarily pro-hype. So at that point, always consider possible solutions across all of the respective data transformation or operations tasks you do in the space. Obviously, if there are deterministic rules, for instance, a strict mapping procedure, or this unit goes to this unit, perhaps a rules engine or a mapping-based solution may be faster, cheaper, and more predictable. So, kind of target the usage of AI to situations where ambiguity exists. Also consider sort of the fact of situations where a standard ETL process will be able to cover gaps that you have in your respective process. The last point, which we brought up earlier, was sort of situations where stakes are high and volume is low, sort of consistent compliance obligations, et cetera. It might be worth kind of having that human in the loop. Just to kind of round things out, this is kind of going back to my previous point made in one of my first slides. But again, you're able to kind of see that useful AI and these three components are kind of met across all of those respective case studies we walk through. So on the measurable impact side, for that broker example, for example, we were able to get them data availability quickly and able to get them go to market way faster than they would have manually. Maybe in another situation, we were able to easily enrich a data set without necessarily having manual intervention. So again, clear measurable impacts across each of these projects. And as you saw throughout each of those projects, there's stage deployment. So at some point, there might have been a human kind of present in review. And also at some point, we were able to use platform components to help QA check pipelines at respective stages to ensure that things are working properly. And to the last point on security and affordability, again, we've talked about some of the solutions we've already used before. So like AWS Bedrock, having good policies and procedures to ensure your prompts are token optimized, and having best practices like environment separation, redaction, etc. In this world, the cost of wrong data is a wrong trade. So it's important to kind of use this sort of a framework to make what some people might think of as a risk into a competitive edge. So with all of that, thank you very much for listening to our presentation. If you're interested more in these use cases or the NG platform, please feel free to reach out to this email. I'll transition over to Travis to talk more about sort of next steps on this.
Again, thank for you. And some of the questions. The first one is, and again, as a reminder, folks, please put your questions in through the chat. I see a few in there already, but feel free to do that as I'm asking these questions to Ani, and then we'll answer yours too. The first one is around, I would like to hear what data readiness looks like in the context of AI supported use cases.
So I guess with respect to data readiness, I would just make the point of having structured schemas and structured outputs is just generally very key on this end. We were in a situation where for that oil brokerage, we had to basically take those unstructured reports and stage them into production. We cannot be in a situation where we are having sort of inputs all present within different structures, different places, different locations where they're being stored. So a lot of that plumbing to get that data into sort of a queryable fashion really puts us in a situation where then you can kind of do some more advanced things, creating forward curves, doing forward projections. So again, I just don't want to undervalue the fact that some of that plumbing and some of that data operations work really puts us in a good place to be able to do some of the cooler analytical work that AI and LLMs allow you to do.
Yeah, I would just kind of second Ani's point there that having access to the data is probably the first point of readiness, right? And some degree of history, right? And then as Ani mentioned, kind of the ongoing process of accessing that data is important, right? Obviously, quality mapping and things like that are all important, but if you have no data to start with, it's pretty hard to do this. Ani, another question here is, you've gone through some use cases, I see, but are there use cases more specifically around kind of trading or actually developing training models using LLMs?
Absolutely. The answer is yes on that end. Obviously, there's no one size fits all box when it comes to trading strategies. Each client has their own respective risk portfolio, own respective products they're trying to trade. So a lot of these strategies and a lot of these procedures we have are kind of tailored and bespoke to some of our clients. But yes, we do. Obviously, there's kind of confidentiality ends on the considerations on that end, but happy to talk more about some of those use cases offline.
I see one more question here, Ani. On the slide, you noted that some regarding AI isn't the right tool, and it's not maybe always the right tool. Can you give a real example when you told a client that they don't actually need AI?
Sure. So a good example of this was in one of our separate client outside of these use cases. Basically, the separate client wanted us to parse a data provider's respective data into a desired output. So this data wanted to also have sort of specific metadata points, so units, so currency, et cetera, et cetera. The client initially kind of put things as, hey, use LLMs, use AI to sort of go in and do this automatically. However, when we ended up going more in depth into the technical and API documentation for this respective data provider, we ended up seeing that there are quite very deterministic rules. For instance, this respective data provider calls a unit a certain way, MMB versus MMBTU, for instance. This respective provider calls certain products certain specific names, which are tailored to being names that exchange market participants are able to kind of clearly know. this is not a situation where you necessarily need to use LLMs because there are deterministic rules at place here. So I guess the main takeaway here is there are situations where there are sort of strict mappings, strict followings, and often the easiest solution might end up being the best solution. So don't necessarily hesitate in taking and accepting those rules and, not necessarily overcomplicating things with when there is no ambiguity. So like that situation I just presented.
Again, obviously, I think that's it for the questions for now. Ani, again, obviously, thank you for the presentation. And again, guys, I would thank you for joining. AI is at the heart of NorthGravity, and this is at the heart of what we've been doing for quite some time. If you'd like to discuss any of these topics in more detail, we would love to discuss with you. So again, feel free to reach out to us either directly or on the email on the screen. But again, thank you for the time, and we look forward to talking to you again shortly. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.